Hi everybody, Mr. Dell here. We are looking at fractions and taking fractions and rewriting them in either a simplified form or maybe looking at a different form, an equivalent form. Basically, taking a fraction and writing an equivalent fraction using the giant one. So we've got some problems where there's question marks where they want us to determine what the giant one is and or determine what the equivalent fraction is. Okay, so I'm specifically taking this question from, this is from CPM course 2, section 5.1.1 in the review preview. So it's a nice review of this concept. So I'm going to rewrite the question so it's easier to see. So part A, we've got 5/8 times some giant 1, okay, is going to equal question mark over question mark, right? We got to figure out what that is. Well, the giant 1, they tell me, is 3 over 3. So from there, now I got to figure out what is the fraction. Well, with a giant 1 and you're doing multiplication, you're only multiplying by 1, right? So when I'm really multiplying by 1, so the fraction value isn't changing. It's just becoming an equivalent fraction. So, and when you multiply by a fraction times a fraction, you just multiply straight across. 5 times 3 is 15. 8 times 3 is 24. So what I now have those two question marks. I have my answer here that my giant 1 just gave me a equivalent fraction. 5/8 is equal to 15 24ths. Okay, there's A. B. So B is saying I've got 9/15, and I'm going to multiply by this giant 1. I'll make it look more like a 1 instead of a box. What is that giant 1? They have a question mark over a question mark, and they want us to figure out the question mark, the numerator here, but they do give us the denominator of 60. So what are those missing pieces? So first of all, if I think about how do I go from 15 to 60? That's the question, right? So that's going to help me figure out what that question mark is. How do I go from 15 to 60? 15 times what is 60? 15 times what? Because I need to figure out what that giant 1 is. Well, if you think about multiplication, if you're trying to figure out what is one of the factors, you use the inverse of multiplication, which is division. So I would just take 60 and divide by 15 to figure out what that is. So 16 divided by 15 is 4. So that tells me right there that this number is a 4 on the denominator. 15 times 4 is 60. And in order for this to be a giant 1, I have to make the numerator 4 as well, because again, I'm not making the fraction bigger. I'm just writing an equivalent fraction by multiplying by only just 4 over 4, which is 1. So 15 times 4 is 60. 9 times 4, that tells me this number is going to be 36. 9 times 4 is 36. So that tells me now I've got that as a 36 over 60, and my giant 1 was 4 over 4. All right, so C. So if we look at C, C is 7/20 times some giant 1. And those are question marks. I don't know what those are. That's what it's saying. Is equal to something over 110. So again, we have the same situation where I'm needing to find out what multiplies times 20 to get 110. And the inverse of multiplication is division. So I need to take and figure out what is 110 divided by 20. That's going to tell me what my factor is, what my multiplying number here would be. So if I do my division, I can see that I can divide at 5 times. 20 goes into 110 5 times. Multiply, I get 100. Subtract, I get 10. So it's not an even amount, so I'm going to go ahead and make this into a decimal. So I have to add a 0, right? When you're doing division, you can add zeros and add your decimal place. Oops, didn't mean to put a number up there. So now I got to go how many and bring down the 0 here. So 20 goes into 100 5 more times. So now I have multiplied by 20, I get 100, and it now no more remainder. So my answer here is 5.5. So that means my giant 1 in this question mark area is going to be 5.5, 5.5. So 20 times 5.5 is 110. So now I write the 5.5 up here as well, because that's going to be I have to have that giant 1. So I got to figure out what is 7 times 5.5, right? When you multiply whole number times a decimal, just ignore the decimal. So I'm going to rewrite and actually do 5.5 times 7 this way. Make it easier. Do the single digit on the bottom. And when I multiply, I get, let's see, 5, carry the 3. That's 35, carry the 3. I get 35, so 38. And then I look to see there was 1 decimal place, so that my answer is going to have 1 decimal place. So 38. So this is 38. Oops, 38.5. So I have 38.5 over 110. So that's what that question mark is. And my giant 1 is 5.5 over 5.5. All right, last one, D. D is saying 44 over 100 times, again, some giant 1, all right, equals something over 60. So in this case, again, I've got to figure out what is my giant 1 and what is the new numerator. So if I look once more, we're asking a question of 100 times some number is 60. Well, I'm taking 100, multiplying by something and getting a smaller number. So I know my number here is going to be a decimal or a fraction. So 100 times what is 60? Well, again, the opposite. To find the multiply, to find the factor, you're going to do division because it's the inverse. So instead of 100 times 60, I'm going to do 60 divided by 100. And this time I'm going to write it like a fraction. When we do 60 divided by 100, you can write it like a fraction because fractions really show division. So 60 divided by a fraction, and then I can simplify this fraction, right? Really, I can simplify it because it actually divides by a giant 1, which is 20 over 20. Right, so I can divide by 20 over 20, which gives me 3/5. So now I have this 60 over 100 is actually 3/5. So my denominator here as a fraction would be 3/5. So it's 100 times 3/5 gave me 60. So I've got to do the same thing up here. I've got to multiply as well by 3/5. So if I'm going to multiply 44 times 3/5, I'll do the math down here. 44 over 1 times 3 over 5. If I multiply straight across, because I don't have any simplification here, the 44 won't reduce or simplify with 5. So 3 times 44 is 132. So 132 over 5. So this number up here is 132 over 5. And that's doing it with fractions. Could you have done this as decimals? You sure could have. It could have been, instead of 3/5, it would have been 6/10. And you would have had as a fraction 6/10 or a decimal 6/10. But doing it in fractions and leaving it as a fraction is just fine. So the last question, E, says, what strategies did you use to find the numbers in the giant 1 in part C, D, and E? Well, notice what we did every time to find those giant 1 numbers, we did division, right? So we could say for E, I'll write it down here. For E, we used division. Okay. All right. There you go.